Hi, ladies and gents. Today we're going to talk about what happens when our cells do not divide properly during meiosis. And so what we need to be able to do is we need to be able to identify what a non-disjunction looks like and results in, as well as how we can look at our chromosomes to determine what disorders resulted from the non-disjunction. So what a karyotype is a picture of all your chromosomes. So they can take any body cell in your entire body, it doesn't matter, extract the chromosomes and put them under a microscope and be able to see which chromosomes you have or do not have. So this particular one, this is a normal male, so there's no disorder here. If you notice, they are numbered 1 through 22, the pairs are, okay? And 1 is the largest chromosome, and as you go through, they get smaller and smaller until 22 is the smallest chromosome. And what we'll end up seeing is the larger the chromosome that you are missing or have an extra one of, the more profound the disability is. Now your 23rd set over here, these are your sex chromosomes. They determine if you are a male or a female based on which one of those you inherit. And so they're kind of separated away because they aren't necessarily homologous chromosomes like the rest are. So remember, homologous chromosomes are chromosomes that are the same size, same shape, same traits on them. So there are two main kinds of chromosomes. Those sex chromosomes that I talked about a minute ago. And they are always the last two chromosomes on a karyotype picture. They're organized that way. Right now, if you are a female, you have two large X chromosomes. They are very similar. They're homologous, all right? And that's if you're a female. If you're a male, you have one large X and a tiny, tiny little Y chromosome. And this little Y chromosome doesn't have a lot of genes on it, just a few things like testosterone, which is what makes you male, and a gene for hairy ears. So, gentlemen, if you look at your fathers, and they have hairy ears, guess what? You had to have inherited your Y chromosome from dad because mom does not have one to give. So you got that from dad, which means if dad has hairy ears, you're going to have hairy ears when you're older, all right, if you don't already. This also means that because when we produce our sex cells, our eggs from females, they only have X's that they could put into their egg cells, whereas boys have X's and Y's. So in the past, especially in royal families, it was a very big deal about females producing a male heir. And there were even some women that were put to death if they did not produce a male heir. But do women have any control over the sex of the baby? Not at all. It is actually the male sperm that determines the sex of the baby, and it's 50-50 every time. I don't care what kind of old wives' tales you've heard about women standing on their head or eating a certain kind of food or holding a needle over your uterus. There's all kinds of crazy stuff out there. There's nothing that's going to influence the sex of your baby beyond the fact that 50% of the sperm produced have X chromosomes in there and 50% Y. So it's a 50-50 chance every time you have a kid. It's like flipping a coin. So females actually have more DNA than males do. Turns out it doesn't really matter because many of the genes on this second X are inactive. But of course in males, the testosterone and hairy ears are always going to be active. So females are XX, males are XY, and they call it a Y not because it's shaped like a Y, but just because it's the next letter in the alphabet and it's different, okay? So what it is, though, is it's tiny. So whenever you see a tiny one over there, it's got to be a male. And I'm going to show you some examples. So typically, if you're normal, you have 2 sex chromosomes. So remember, if you're normal too, you have a total of 46 chromosomes. 2 of them are sex chromosomes. So that means the other 44 are something else. And what these are called autosomes. All right? Autosomes are the chromosomes that make your body parts, like, hey, put a head here, put 2 arms on. Let's give them some eyeballs. So all those instructions are inside these that determine your body structure, which is separate from your sex because these are all things that males and females have in common, all right? So those are all the other chromosomes. So 2 sex chromosomes, 44 autosomes if you're normal. Sometimes we become not normal, okay? If things don't divide right. So this is a failure of our chromosome pairs to separate during meiosis. So remember, they line up in the middle during metaphase of meiosis, both metaphase 1 and metaphase 2. They get pulled apart during anaphase. Well, if something happens during anaphase, a mutation occurs where those chromosomes or those tetrads don't separate properly, you're going to land up with cells that either have one too many chromosomes or are missing a chromosome. And so this will lead to a disorder if that egg or that sperm is used to produce a baby. Okay, so if they actually fertilize each other, then you're going to have a baby with a disorder. So this is what this looks like. So here's your chromosomes. See that bottom pair that did not separate? So when they divide a second time, half of these sex cells are going to have an extra chromosome, and the other half are going to be missing a chromosome. So this happened to be non-disjunction during meiosis 1, the first division. And when you have non-disjunction occur in the first division, every single sex cell produced is abnormal. And so if one of those gets fertilized, if these were eggs, and one of these is going to be the egg that the female is going to produce, right? His other three would be polar bodies, and it gets fertilized that month, then you have a baby with a disorder. Now, these non-disjunctions are incredibly rare, but they do occur, and they occur more often if mom is older, all right? That's why they tell you, hey, don't have kids when you're 50, or even if over 37 is the age where your likelihood to have a non-disjunction really does go up, okay? So we have two types of non-disjunction. We have what's a monosomy. So remember, mono is one. We learned that before when we talked about monomers. So a monosomy is when you have one chromosome when you're supposed to be having two. All right. So you're lacking one or more chromosomes. You're missing one. In most of the cases, if you're missing a chromosome, you're missing a bunch of instructions for making your body. The zygote, which is the fertilized egg, does not survive. All right, and so mom has what is a natural abortion. That's when your body just lets go of that fertilized egg, and it comes out, and you don't even know it. You don't even know a lot of times that you were even pregnant. It happens before you had any idea. All right, so this does happen when you have a monosomy. It's like a natural abortion where your body just rejects it and it doesn't fertilize. Or if the baby does fertilize, it's not going to make it to full term in most cases. This baby is not going to survive. Now, the opposite of that is the trisomy. Trisomy, remember, you usually have two, so tri is for three. So trisomy is when you have one extra chromosome. And so when you have one extra chromosome, you have extra instructions, which you would think, hey, extra instructions, that's got to be a good thing, right? But no, it really messes up the process of making body parts. It's like if you got furniture from IKEA and you take 3 extra random pages and stick it in the instructions, you're going to get a little confused and stuff might not get built right. Okay, so the same thing's happening with our instructions for our DNA. So here's a picture of the non-disjunctions, and the animation showed us this first one over here, where my tetrad did not separate, my little couples here, my homologous chromosomes. And so this guy, they should have 2 chromosomes. This guy's got 3, these guys have 1 pair, and so every single chromosome is messed up. They have an extra one, these are missing one. Now, a better occurrence, not that you get to pick, is that your first division goes fine, and you have non-disjunction in your second division. So that means this cell over here will divide normally, and you'll get half normal cells with the 2 they're supposed to have. But this one has a non-disjunction right here. This chromosome was not split at the centromere. And so this one cell has an extra one, and this one is missing one. So in this case, like if you were making a batch of sperm, half the sperm would be normal, half would be abnormal. And of course, that would give you a better chance of getting a normal child if fertilization occurred than you would over here, okay? So if you got to pick, you'd want non-disjunction of meiosis too, but you don't get to pick. It just happens. Okay. So these abnormalities in chromosome numbers, in most cases, will kill the zygote. All right, it will not live, And again, the woman doesn't ever know she was even pregnant or that her egg was fertilized. But sometimes, in some situations, they do survive. And so those are the ones we're going to talk about today. So the first one, and the most common one, is Down syndrome. So Down syndrome is a trisomy of the 21st chromosome. Now, chromosome 21 is a very small chromosome. The only one that's smaller is chromosome 22 and your Y chromosome. So they're very, very small. And because of this, they don't have a lot of genes on there. And that's why somebody with a trisomy in these small chromosomes is capable of surviving. All right, so non-disjunction chromosome 21. So instead of having 2, they got 3. And so Down syndrome, people with Down syndrome, it's a huge range of disabilities with Down syndrome. You can be somebody with Down syndrome who's very highly functional, like Becky here from Glee. So Becky has Down syndrome, but she is an actress able to maintain a job and memorize lines. So that's pretty good for somebody with Down syndrome. She's making a lot more money than many of us when she was doing this show. All right, but so there's a wide range of mental handicap, all right, being mentally handicapped. They do tend to be short in stature, so it's shorter than average. They have characteristic facial features. They tend to look very childlike, even as adults. They have like rounded cheeks, and it makes them kind of cute. The problem is whenever you have these external abnormalities, they are always indicative of internal abnormalities. So people who have Down syndrome do tend to have heart defects. And because of this, they can get heart attacks at a younger age than normal, so in their 40s or 50s. So it can shorten their lifespan. So this is a karyotype, a real karyotype of somebody with Down syndrome. And so again, you can see we went from large chromosomes to small chromosomes. And no, these are not all laying down nice and flat, because in real life, when you take your pictures of your chromosomes, they're not all perfectly laid out. So this individual has, you can see at the 21st, has 3 chromosomes. They have an extra one. So instead of a total of 46 chromosomes, they have 47. They still have 2 sex chromosomes. And so this individual, unfortunately my face is over here. This individual is a male, I believe, where one is smaller and one is larger. And over here, this is their disorder. All right, so 2 sex chromosomes, and if you counted these, it would be 45 autosomes, which if you're normal, you have 44. Or you can think of it this way, they have 47 total. 2 of them are sex chromosomes. That leaves 45, which is what your autosomes are. Still 1 extra. So here's some kids with Down syndrome. You can see they're super cute. All right, they have rounded little cheeks. And again, with Down syndrome, some of these kids are going to be dependent on somebody else for the rest of their lives. Some of them can hold down jobs and have apartments. There's just a wide range of capabilities. And we have students at our school who have Down syndrome. All right, guys, so if we look at this one, you can see right where the problem is. This individual has an extra number 13 chromosome. This chromosome is much, much larger than the 21st chromosome we saw with Down syndrome. Because this one is so much larger, we're going to see some profound effects on these individuals. This is a really sad one. If you look over on the sex chromosomes, you have 2 large X ones. So this is a girl, even though this one's curled up, because remember, they don't like to lay flat always, but they're both large. So this is a female with a trisomy 13, an extra 13th chromosome. So this is called Patau syndrome. Patau syndrome is rare, but it is something they can test for with prenatal testing. This one has very, very severe mental retardation. There's a lot of abnormalities on the outside. Kids tend to have a cleft lip, which is when their lip does not grow together in the center. Even their cheeks can be cleft cheeks, where the cheek does not fully fuse together. They tend to have extra fingers on their hands and their toes. There's malformations of the eyes. The ears tend to be really, really small. The head is abnormally small. And again, all these external characteristics that we see are indicative of internal abnormalities. So when you look at babies with Patau syndrome, which is really sad, these babies are not going to live long. Typically, babies that are born that actually make it full term with Patau's only live a couple days at most. because their organs just didn't form properly. If you look at the pictures, you can see the cleft lip on the little babies. And if you look at the hand, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 fingers. Okay. So Patau syndrome is one of those ones that if your doctor suspects that your baby might not be developing properly by having sonograms, so when you're pregnant, you should have sonograms. And if you think something's not developing properly, they're going to suggest that you get tested, because this is a really hard one to brace yourself for. Now this individual, this one has an extra chromosome on the 18th spot. So this is trisomy 18. 18 is a little smaller than 13, so not quite as bad, but still much larger than 21. If you look at their sex chromosomes, this is also a female. So a female with trisomy 18. So this is called Edwards syndrome. Edwards syndrome, babies born with this also are mentally handicapped. When you mess up your instructions, the brain is definitely one of the places that typically does have damage occur because it's so complex. There's defects in the hands and the head, abnormalities. So you can see here you got fingers that are fused together, or you have extra toes. And so these guys, again, external abnormalities, internal abnormalities. These kids typically only live to be 3 or 5 years old at the most. So it's a real short lifespan when you have these large chromosomal disorders. All right, so now this one's not quite as sad. Those were the sad ones. This one, all the autosomes are perfect, all right, all these 44. Where this disorder is right here. This individual has 3 sex chromosomes, so 47 total, and 3 of them are sex chromosomes. Now there's 2 X's and a Y. If the Y is present, it's automatically a male because you're going to have testosterone, which is going to make you grow male stuff. And usually, what I get asked is if this is a hermaphrodite. Hermaphrodite are children that are born with both male and female genitalia. Well, that's not the case. This does not cause that. You're still born with male genitalia with this because you have this Y chromosome. But that extra X does have effects. So this is called Klinefelter syndrome, XXY. So they are all males. They tend to be taller than normal, so above average height, but they have below average intelligence. So always the brain is affected, okay? And they're also almost always sterile, which means they're not producing functional sperm most of the time, okay? There's reason for this. It has to do with the hormones. So it's almost like they're getting an extra dose of estrogen in there. So these guys have some female type characteristics because of that extra Y chromosomes, but they are still male. All right. So some of the things you'll notice is they're shaped more feminine, like they have little hips to them that are more feminine shape. In their chest area, they will grow some fatty tissue. So these are not, they do not have true breasts like a female does. They can't feed babies or anything like that. They're just a little bit more plump in that area, which is indicative of this disorder. Now, let me clarify that some people who are holding a little bit extra weight on them also can develop that. That's not the same thing as a genetic disorder. Now, this individual, I didn't point it out to you. So if you look at this for a minute, try to find where the abnormality is. So if you look at the top, we have 2 of everything there, 2 of everything there, 2 of everything there, 2 of everything there, and then this. So this one, we got X, Y, Y. So this is another disorder of the sex chromosomes. Now this one is definitely a guy. This one has 2 Y chromosomes, like having a double dose of testosterone here. So if you think about guys and their testosterone, you can probably figure out some of the characteristics of these individuals. It is to the testosterone in males that makes you guys feel like you're indestructible and you can do crazy stuff. So this is called Jacob syndrome, XYY. And Jacob syndrome, they're of course male. They tend to be big guys who are not super smart. And they have mild to severe behavioral disturbances. So they have behavioral problems. So if you take guys who are bigger than normal, big guys, not very smart and have behavioral issues, where are these guys going to end up a lot of the time? In jail, right? So a couple of true stories. This guy right here, he is somebody who killed a bunch of nurses, and he's a serial killer. And he turns out he had Jacob's syndrome. But the story I'm going to tell you is not about this gentleman. The story I'm going to tell you is about another guy. There's this guy, big guy, who went into a convenience store intending to rob the convenience store. When he got in there, he got real mad and instead shot and killed 5 people. So of course he was arrested. He went to jail. While he was in jail, he had a really smart lawyer. His lawyer took one look at him and says, "Hey, let's get some genetic testing done." And this was around the time that all this information in genetics was coming out. So they had the genetic testing done, and it turned out that this individual had Jacob's syndrome. Now, since then, we've done tests of prison communities, and there is a larger number of individuals in jail with Jacob's syndrome, a percentage, than there is out in society. So that tells us about some of these people who have Jacob's syndrome, that this genetic abnormality is influencing their behavior, okay? So this guy's lawyer, super smart guy, says, okay, well, I'm going to take this to court. When he took it to court, he said, it is not my client's fault that he killed these 5 people. His genes made him do it. That's really smart, right? So what do you think? Do you think he won? So here's what happened. The other lawyer, equally intelligent, he came up and said, well, yes, you know, he has Jacob's syndrome. This is something that could tend to influence behavior. However, not everyone with Jacob's syndrome has gone to jail. And not everybody with Jacob's syndrome has shot and killed 5 people. This tells me that some people with Jacob's syndrome are able to overcome their behavioral disturbances and live in society in a positive way. So his genes did not make him do this. All right, so he did lose the case. Luckily, that guy stayed in jail. But it was a very interesting case, this idea that our genes dictate who we are as a person, which was disproved by the fact that there are numbers of people that manage not to murder people even though they have this disorder. Now this individual is an interesting one. This is the only case of a monosomy where the baby survives, the zygote survives. And you can see the autosomes are all perfectly normal, all 44 of them. This is another disorder of the sex chromosomes. All right, so this one, you only have one sex chromosome, and it's an X. So it automatically makes you female because there's no Y there. So instead of 46 chromosomes, this individual has 45. One of them is a sex chromosome, and 44 is an autosome. So this is called Turner syndrome. Turner syndrome, they're all women. They tend to be short women, and there's actually not a lot of external abnormalities. The biggest one is if you look closely at this little kid, they get this kind of webbing on the side of their neck, this extra flap of skin. And usually a little cosmetic surgery, you could get that removed and it's no big deal and you're just a short woman. You have underdeveloped ovaries. That doesn't mean that you can't have kids. It just makes it harder. This lady you might recognize here, she was in Poltergeist and one of those like Law and Order type shows. She's an actress and she's come out and said that she has Turner syndrome and she is indeed a short lady. So here's a close-up of the neck. You can see if you look closely the extra flap of skin on the side of the neck that is indicative of this abnormality. So not a big deal to have that one. They come out pretty normal otherwise. There's other kinds of chromosomal disorders that are harder to see in a karyotype. And so they include these things called deletion, duplication, inversion, insertion, and translocation. And the names kind of tell you what they are. So if we look at the picture, deletion is when spontaneously a piece of your chromosome is deleted. This is typically a bad mutation because you're losing instructions. It's like taking a page out of your IKEA instructions. So this is typically a bad thing and results in some kind of disorder. And there's no one disorder because this could occur on any of your chromosomes. Duplication sometimes is bad and good. This is when you take a part of your DNA and you make an extra copy. And this is how humans got colored vision. Everyone who can see color has this duplication in their DNA. that occurred spontaneously in our ancestors. And people who are colorblind are missing that duplication, and that's a throwback to our ancestors before this mutation occurred. Inversion means to take a gene out and flip it. You're inverting it and putting it back in. This is usually real bad because it messes up your code. Insertion is when you take a piece of one chromosome and insert it in another, and that typically messes up two chromosomes, so it's not a good thing. Translocation means to change location. This is like crossing over, except between chromosomes that are not homologous. So you take a piece of each and you swap it, and you basically mess up both of these chromosomes. So chromosomal disorders are incredibly rare. They're not something you should worry about necessarily, unless, again, you're having your children at an older age. But it is something that you guys should be aware of for when you have children in the future. So it's something you keep an eye on when you have your sonograms and if anything is developing incorrectly.